Barton, thanks again for coming on the program tonight, sir. Good talking to you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And a great column, Gun Control Logic, Plumb, Loko. You hit on three topics that we've been discussing extensively here on the program. The quote-unquote gun show loophole, the TSA screenings, and the alcoholic caffeinated beverage known as Four Loko. You say we're seeing the government sort of display the same mentality in all three areas, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so what are we looking at here?
Well, to me, it's a sort of dragnet surveillance type mentality. You see the same thing happening with, for example, roadside checkpoints run by the police, where they basically, stop everybody, and the presumption is that everybody ought to be searched. Everybody ought to, ought to prove that they have nothing to hide and they've done nothing wrong. Whereas I think the presumption ought to be quite the opposite. I think that law enforcement, whether the issue is gun control or transportation security or the drug war, what have you, my position would be the government shouldn't, try to surveil everybody, but look for reasons that might cause suspicion. And then focus on where the problem actually lies.
Well, and you make a really good point that the sort of one-size-fits-all solution doesn't usually pay dividends in the real world. For instance, you look at what we did to try to restrict the availability of methamphetamine a few years ago, and now if you want to buy cold medicine that has pseudoephedrine in it, you got to go and you got to sign your name at the pharmacy. You can only get so much per month. But what has happened to meth in the meantime is that the Mexican drug cartels have taken over the production. Meth is cheaper than it was before these restrictions were put in place, and it's more widely available than before these restrictions were put in place.
Yeah, the Washington Post had a fascinating article, I think it was Sunday, where they talked about Mexican meth production, and they talked about how the cartels will, order pharmaceuticals from Indonesia or something and then route it through Belgium, and then it gets to Mexico, and they're making meth by the hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And so the idea that you're going to reduce meth production in the United States by telling, grandma that she can't buy a bottle of pseudoephedrine without a doctor's prescription, it just strikes me as odd.
Well, absolutely. And again, you point out the quote-unquote gun show loophole. You say that the legislation aimed at the supposed loophole would incommode millions of law-abiding people in the faint hope of producing a reduction in crime that's marginal at best. We know that criminals, by and large, do not get their guns from gun shows. Studies have been done showing it as something like less than 1% or less than 2% of guns used in crimes come from gun shows.
Yeah, well, the whole logic of gun control, I find sort of offensive from a civil liberties perspective. It's almost a form of profiling where you say that, we suspect that at some point in the future, a small percentage of all of you gun owners might possibly commit a crime with your gun. Therefore, we're going to require all of you to jump through the following hoops. And we just don't do that.
No, you're right. We don't. And I think that, getting back to the TSA discussion, when you saw Americans, and despite the fact that, the National Opt-Out Day kind of fizzled out, I still believe that there are millions of Americans who are upset by this, who are figuring out that they've not only have they had enough, but they're now figuring out how to use their voice to say enough is enough. And do you think we'll see, Barton, this backlash against the overreach of the nanny state in the future?
Well, I think we will, and I think we'll see it in the TSA situation sooner rather than later, because the current procedures are so cumbersome and they produce so many public relations disasters for the TSA. Like, for example, last year when the TSA officials confiscated the Play-Doh belonging to a 3-year-old boy named Josh Pitney, on the presumption that, it might possibly be Semtex. I mean, come on. Look for the guy who's wearing a bulky overcoat and chanting under his breath and sweating with a glassy stare. Take the Israeli approach to behavioral profiling. I think that's, a lot more efficient, and eventually that's where we're going to end up. But it's just, you got to push.
Well, absolutely. You do have to push, and I think that people are learning how to do this. And frankly, this may be coming at a good time, Barton, where a lot of Americans are saying that spending needs to be cut. Clearly, we're in a financial mess. More Americans say cut spending than raise taxes. And, you know, if you have less of these intrusive programs, that's going to save everybody money too, isn't it?
Well, it is going to save everybody money. And what I would really hope to see is that, liberals who were upset by the supposed descent of the dark night of fascism during the Bush years would stand up alongside conservatives who are upset over civil liberties infringements to the TSA, and that, when power changes hands in D.C. once again, that conservatives will confront Republican administrations on these same issues, and that both sides will be a little bit more consistent in standing up for the entire package of the Bill of Rights.
All right, now you may be going a bridge too far, Barton.
I mean, yeah, well, I know. I'm living in a fantasy land. I get accused of that quite often.
Well, listen, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight. It was a great column, again, tying these very disparate issues together so that folks can understand the underlying principle of work in all of these different things. Really appreciate your time and look forward to doing this again very soon.